Welcome to another episode of Doubl3Tap. Today we are joined by Amitt Mahajan, the co-founder and CEO of Proof of Play. Proof of Play is currently developing a fully on-chain game called Pirate Nation. They somewhat recently migrated from Polygon, I believe, to Arbitrum, and now they're building out their own gaming infrastructure layer with Arbitrum Orbit. So lots to talk about. Amitt, thank you very much for joining us. How are you, sir?
I'm really good. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to chat.
Yeah. Before we get started, disclosures out of the way. So the content in this show is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The views shared by Alex and I are our own, and we may have investments in some of the companies or digital assets mentioned throughout the show. With that out of the way, Amitt, what games are you currently playing?
Well, actually, I just literally right before this call, I was playing the new Final Fantasy 7, Part 2. It's so good. The original Final Fantasy 7 is one of my favorite games of all time. It was iconic when it came out. And they just full setted this thing, right? I don't know if you guys are FF7 fans, but it was just complete, a labor of love. The soundtrack's amazing. It's just so epically good. Yeah, it's super fun.
Did you also play Final Fantasy 16 at all? For me, playing the two, I was trying to figure out which combat system I like better.
No, 16's on my. I've been so busy. It's really hard for me to really commit to an RPG.
Yeah.
But it's next on my list. I've played through everything else. I've played literally 1 through 15. I played all the MMOs. I maxed out my characters in those. I mean, a lot of my career has been, and the games we make are inspired by the Final Fantasy series for
sure. Yeah, let's get into it. Okay, cool. So one of the hardest problems in gaming is distribution, right? As a lot of us know. And this is clearly a lot harder in Web3. So curious, now that you guys have kind of taken the position of really focusing on on-chain games, what do you think the TAM is for on-chain games, and what sort of unique or Web3 enabled types of UA do you guys intend to try out in the future?
Yeah.
Or are you trying out right now?
It's a great question. I mean, I don't really discern between the TAM of, say, a mobile game and the TAM of a Web3 game. For us, something that we've been doing from the start was essentially telling, I've told my team, we just need to make fun games. In fact, we were building during the bear, and it was just too much to just sit there and be our entire fate is dependent on this market coming back. Right. So I believe in radical agency, really leaning into controlling your own destiny. And so my belief was that if we can make great games and we put them on mobile and we hide the blockchain and we don't tell people it's on chain, then there's no reason why we couldn't succeed, whether it was blockchain or not. And so when I think about, how we get users, it's more about okay, what type of game are we making? In our case, it's casual mobile games. Casual mid-mobile games like Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, Marvel Strike Force, those type of games. The original idea was if we create great games, then people will find those games on the App Store and they'll play. But just adding a bit to that. So if I go, a step further, I think for Web3 games in particular, we have this unique thing where we can essentially draw people in through incentives, right? So we launched this thing recently in Pirate Nation called Booty Points. It's a whole tongue-in-cheek thing. It was actually coined by our community. They basically were you guys should launch a meme coin and call it Booty. And we're no, we're a real company. We're going to build real stuff. But the idea is cool. Let's see if we can do it in our own way, right? And so we launched this thing recently, and basically it's our extended onboarding, right? It's come into the game, do these things just in the game, outside the game, in the community. And it's a way of bringing people through from being an outsider to being a player of the game and integrated member of the community. And that's kind of how we think about onboarding. It's this holistic experience. So my belief is that like if you start to create that and create incentives for them to invite their friends, you can actually distribute the game that way.
I'm curious. Do you think when you add in the Web3 incentive layer, financial layer, whatever you want to call it, does that let you go a little bit like further upstream in terms of live operations? So in other words, like post launch, if you're running a live ops game, you have to create the content treadmill, right? But with crypto, you're actually going out and engaging the audience earlier, and you have to create content, but it may not be content that exists in the game. It may be content, on crypto Twitter. It might be things that are engaging the community, like a booty type of program. I'm curious, like whether you think Web3 is changing kind of the game in terms of like, hey, you actually do need to be creating content that might be bifurcated from the underlying game, and then pushing that to your community to engage with them earlier.
You 100% got it, and I'm like kind of surprised actually that you guys like understand this so deeply. Like, yeah, I call it inner and outer meta, right? Like it's this idea that there's the game itself, and then there's like the game that happens outside of the game, that happens on Discord, it happens on Twitter, it happens on OpenSea, but it's all the game, right? And so you're right, like that's the whole thing about booty points, is that it actually extends past what's in-game actions and actually includes this outer meta as well. But the way that we're thinking about it is that like, how do we determine what we value in our community, and how do we encourage people to take those actions? So it's really about like shaping this player experience and this community experience for people.
And when you're trying to figure out what the value is of different community members or users, like are there certain types of KPIs that you have for like these different archetypes of gamers or users, right? Because I think, kind of going to your point, like you've got the game, like the underlying, then you've got the meta game. And clearly there's going to be different types of users that interact with different parts of that stack. So yeah, I'm curious, like certain types of KPIs that you guys might be.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, ultimately though, like we really just want real players. Like we don't want people who are just coming in and extracting. That's going to exist. That is an archetype. It's the person who comes in. You basically look at their account. It's like, okay, are they transferring more like resources out of the account than they're burning within the game's ecosystem? You can basically build a ratio and figure out like if someone's, a net extractor or not based on that. But, for us, it's really about like, who's a player. Like a lot of the mobile game players are never going to engage with crypto side. They're just like free to play players. But like, when we think about, like kind of, there's these like, there's the crypto native folks who like engage with the game, and they also play the min-max game on the marketplace, and they're also creating guilds. Like there's like these different player archetypes. There's like people who organize, there's developers who build tools and clients for the ecosystem. We're trying to figure out all of those archetypes as we go, and we've got like 4 or 5 of them. But and they require like different levels of features, attention, and so on. But for us, the challenge is how do you serve all of them effectively?
So is the like crypto tech stack, like the infrastructure stack, what's really kind of guiding the like the roadmap in like the short to medium term? Like, is it the limitations of the infrastructure or the friction that the infrastructure creates? One of the biggest blockers.
Partly, we're also building our own on-chain game engine. So the way to think about it is we're basically building a database on-chain, which allows us to very quickly make it so that non-technical people can put gameplay features on-chain. This is a big part of our strategy as a whole. And like Pirate Nation is just the proof of concept of how do you build on-chain games, right? But the cool thing is like we're like really dogfooding it, right? And we're trying to build real games using our tech. And if we succeed, like the company is like wildly successful, even without us ever doing the platformization of anything. But my belief is that if we succeed, that there's gonna be a lot of demand for it. So, so for us, it's literally like, how do we get 1 million users on chain? How do we get 10 million users playing our games? And like, my background is I was one of the creators of Farmville, and we did 300 million players in that game. We did $1 billion of revenue. Like I've scaled games to that level, and I saw how we did at Zynga, and I think it's possible. There's no reason why we couldn't do it. And so for us, it's just one foot in front of the other, and just like and the big thing here is I believe that if we show that we can do this, it's not just for games, it's for other dApps as well. And so like that's the real opportunity of what we're doing.
Do you do you think that like supermassive scale is aided by Web3 native mechanics like the point system? Or is it just you've made a great game that scales and it happens to be fully on chain?
You need both, right? Like you can bring a billion people in. You see it happen all the time in crypto, right? Like you have whatever 100,000 people go and download some app or play Step In or whatever, right? They don't retain because it's just there's nothing at the end of this like incentive model. Like my view is that like the only real alpha in this space is people who actually want to own the art and people who actually want to play the game because it's fun, not because they're paid to, not because they're, incentivized to. It's because there's just like true desire for the products being created, right? So that whole like hologram YC make something people want totally applies here. It's still the same thing. And that root of, you've created a good or service that someone wants, then you can put all the incentive models on top of it. So you have to build a good game. You can't do it without it. But it's gasoline for the fire. And so, when I think about, the way that we're going about it, it's there's that Charlie Munger quote. It's like, if you want to explain behavior, show me the incentives, right? I think that's the same thing here. It's just like, okay, like we can get people to try the game, but we can't get them to stick around. So the game, they come for the incentive, they come to try it out, but then they stick around for the game and community. And so you kind of need both.
Do you think and I think to a certain extent this is going to be true across all games and genres, but I'm curious from your perspective, from your experience, how this like additive incentive layer changes the player behavior. So a classic example uses if you have the same game but you add incentives to one, then that fun element gets somewhat corrupted and turns into more of like an incentive driven behavior pattern. I'm curious, like, have you, from transitioning from like Farmville into Pirate Nations, have you seen something similar? Or?
Yeah, it's like our retention curves look much more similar to like payer retention curves in mobile games, and I think that that's a little bit like, I think a lot of teams are going to get tripped up by that because as soon as you go to mobile, all of a sudden like those incentives aren't there because you can't have them on the App Store, and so, or at least they're not there in your face, and so like I think the real retention numbers are going to start to come out then, and so like I almost view it as like, okay, like the incentive version is like, onboarding with training wheels. But if you want to play like in the majors, you have to go to the App Store and like, compete with other free to play games and see if you retain then. But we're mostly seeing it in like these like kind of much stronger retention curves. But I'm also like somewhat like pragmatic and pessimistic. Like I'm just like, okay, like cool, it's promising, but let's see what happens when we try to onboard people who aren't crypto natives.
And
yeah.
Do you have like a strong opinion on like native app versus like a PWA? Like I know there's like teams that are like very opinionated on that. I mean, you said you value simplicity. I'm assuming you probably want it in the App Store. You want the native app, but
yeah. I mean, we're using Unity, and so like my other view is just like take the risk. Like we're already taking out so much technical risk. Like just like lower the risk everywhere else, right? Like I'm not trying to innovate on the client. Like, we're already taking on, like, we're completely replacing our database and our servers with this, like, this blockchain and all of these smart contracts. Like, let's keep it simple on the front end. So we're using, like, React TypeScript for our web page and, any of our Web3 features there. And then, like, for the game itself, it's all Unity. And we have Unity WebGL for the web. And then the game's already running on mobile. It's been running on mobile for, like, over 6 months now. So I have a version that's running on my phone. We're just not ready to release it.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. When things gets really exciting is when you start to think about like top of funnel on app stores and then like funnel off platform to web apps. and that seems to be like the
Yeah,
current
so let's
industry
let's talk
trend.
about that for a second, right? I think you're hitting on something interesting here. So I don't think you put crypto at the front of people. I actually think you keep it like as a late stage thing. It's like later in the user experience. So it's like you're playing the game, you're just like having a good time, and at some point it's like, hey, like go check out, the online community, and your profile's there, and there's like a number. It's like, total account value, right? And it's the floor price of all the stuff you've collected, right? That's going to be a whoa moment for people when they're like, hey, like, wow, like this game I've been playing actually has this entire other. It's like, it's like Final Fantasy VII. You're in, you're in Midgar, and you're like, oh, this game's incredible, and then you like leave, and you're like, holy shit, this game is way bigger than I thought it was, right? And that like mind blowing moment of there's way more to this than I thought is the moment I think that people go from being like crypto's not the thing for me, Web3 games are just, they're just cash grabs to, oh, there's something much bigger that's happening here. And you need to have that like jaw-dropping experience for people in order to truly convert them. And so I think the way you do is you progressively get to the more crypto data features, the more community-based features later in the user journey.
I want to steer the conversation towards some of the infra that you guys are building out. You've already mentioned how proof of play was essentially dog food in the tech as you built out Pirate Nations. And I think there's a similar trend across a couple different well-funded projects in the space that, once you start building here and have even a remote level of like traditional industry experience, you really understand how much is lacking here, and then start building out, and then eventually you can then productize that. So would you mind taking us through a little bit of kind of what were some of the big bottlenecks or challenges that you kind of overcame by creating
Oh my God. It's like triggering my PTSD. Yeah, no, I mean, there's been so much, right? Like something simple like random numbers, right? When you're on chain, like random numbers are actually really hard, right? And if you play games or make games, you know that like dice rolls have been a part of games since like, games existed basically. So the first thing is we started off on Chainlink. We were using Chainlink. Chainlink has this thing called VRF. It's a verifiable randomness function. Too expensive, too slow. So we built our own, right? And we basically replaced Chainlink. We were not paying Link token anymore. Okay, great. Then we were using a relay. We were using something called Biconomy. Kept going down, unreliable support. Replaced that, built our own relayer, right? For a while, we were using I forgot what it was. It was just like, I think Open Zeppelin or something else. And another thing, it was like, oh, this is not working for us. So we've progressively just had to build our own infra because we were just pushing things way harder than most games were. So like, for example, our chain Apex, we have like 7 million transactions on that in the last like 7 weeks. Like we're basically like really pushing this tech to its limits. Our demands are just different from like, every other project that exists out there. Like we're not a swapping interface. We're like every click in the game is a transaction. And so we just had to continually, build our own tech as a result.
From that process, what would be some of like the standout? So, for those unaware, you've now kind of turned the Apex chain into an ecosystem that can now like attract third-party content. What do you believe are some of the features there that kind of really stand out? Like, I mean, from our list, I know you have a ton of marketplace controls, the browser wallet, gasless listings. What are some that stand out to you?
So our view is just like, how do we continue to reduce friction, right? Like it's continuous improvement of just, what is the user doing? What's holding them back? What's causing them to have an unoptimal user experience and iterating? So, we launched the game a year and a half ago and we've done about 80 updates. We do weekly updates and we have something like a 70 or 80 week streak now on that. So we're constantly improving it. But, in terms of like, big big features, I think the biggest thing is that there's gasless, signless gameplay. We have our own marketplace that's like game native. So like for example, we hide things like soulbound items that like can't be traded. You can't do that on OpenSea. It's actually a problem. Gasless listings. And so like all these things are just like incremental improvements, but like when taken as a whole, result in a user experience that's just different than everything else that exists out there.
I'm also something that stands out to me that's somewhat unique to what you guys have built is the fact that your kind of North Star is a native app experience on the App Store. And I'm personally not aware of any other games that can claim to be fully on chain and also, get like can even conceive of being listed on an app store. So I'm curious, how does that work when every single click is a blockchain interaction? How do you facilitate like frictionless mobile play?
Essentially, we're creating a gameplay wallet. There's like your ownership wallet. It's like where all your stuff lives. And then under the covers, we essentially have the equivalent of like a gameplay wallet that can only take gameplay actions on your behalf. So your ownership wallet, essentially you log into a gameplay, you log a gameplay wallet into your ownership wallet and the ownership wallet says, hey, gameplay wallet can do all these things on my behalf. We have the private key for that in the client, but all it can do is just sign gameplay transactions. And so all it's doing is just signing these transactions, sends it to our relayer, and then we send it to the chain. But then what we're doing on the chain is we're doing a gas rebate for any of our relayers. So essentially, we're not paying for our gas on our own chain. And as a result, we're able to facilitate millions of transactions for free for users. Over time, we're going to have to split to multiple chains because you can't put hundreds of millions of users on a single chain. So we're going to do something that you see in Web 2, which is load balancing in order to make it all work.
That's really interesting. So it's essentially you're creating session keys and having a certain layer of like account abstraction.
Exactly. And the thing is, it's only going to get more sophisticated, right? Like we're going to start doing like delegated ownership, multi-party communication, or computation, essentially making it so that people can easily like loan their assets out. We can build it all at the platform level, and then we'll have for all the games we develop.
From a business model angle, I'm curious, now that you've transitioned to creating your own L3 and you'll at some point be able to offer this kind of like tech stack to third-party developers that want to come onto the Apex chain or within the Apex ecosystem. Seeing that it seems that gasless transactions is something that's important to you that you want to maintain, where does that upside come from, and how do you monetize these services?
Yeah, I view our business model, there's like three revenue streams. One is we sell stuff to players, skins, whatever. Two is players sell stuff to each other, and we have a creator fee on top of it. And three is we retain some of the assets that we create in our treasury. And as the value of those assets go up, so does the value of our treasury. And over time, we can find a way to divest some of that position, and as a result, bring revenue into the company. Sequencer fees, maybe. Like, we'll see. Like, I know that's what a lot of people are pursuing, but I also think it's because they're not making stuff they can just like sell to people, right? Like, they're trying to like, okay, we'll build an ecosystem, we'll bring lots of activity in, and then we'll like collect fees on that. Okay, that's interesting, but like I view it as like I'm creating a universe, right? And like I'm creating economic activity within this universe. And how do we benefit? How do we align ourselves with the economic activity that's happening within the universe that we've created? I mentioned before, there's three things developers need, right? The speed of market. Okay, we have a tech stack and an engine and so on that people can use to basically build their games, and a chain that they can potentially deploy to, or will help provision a chain for them, right? So if they want their own, okay, that's interesting. We could be like an L3 reseller. That's like something that's possible. Two is distribution is, okay, we have a bunch of games, right? Like, we can help cross promote. We can help with some incentive models. There's like, we can actually essentially act as a publisher. And in 3D monetization, we have credit card payments already in our product. We have a marketplace that makes it easy for people to buy and sell to each other, despite the chain they're on. It's built into our infra, and so the economic levers are already there for people to start monetizing.
I'm curious. You mentioned like a Web3 publisher. I'm curious. Like, obviously, there's a lot of like right out in the open differences between the common publishers of today and what the Web3 like native publishers of tomorrow look like. I'm curious, like, what do you think, like, how do they look different from a business perspective? And like, what are some things that you think might be kind of beyond what meets the eye? Like, just because you're so much deeper than most people, it's like, I'm very curious.
Yeah.
What do you think that looks like?
I think like publishers today don't really help with like community development. How do you create community? How do you find mods? How do you like market the stuff on Discord and Twitter? How do you integrate seamlessly how do you think about like tokenization, right? Like, how do you think about okay, you're creating an NFT collection. How are you going to like structure that stuff? So there's a whole thing around just like gamification of the outer meta, right? And to me, a good publisher would be able to actually help guide you through that process, from being a person who knows how to use Unity and make games, being someone who's like, oh, like I see, it's just like at Zynga, we brought a bunch of game devs in from like console gaming and at the time mobile didn't exist, but then we're like, this is how you make a social game. Here's the playbook, right? You need like notifications, you need these things, you need analytics, and we basically took non-social game developers and we made them into social game developers. I think the same thing's true for a good publisher here, is that they basically help you actually like figure out the Web3 side of the business and educate you and like level you up. It's almost like an MBA program or like an accelerator.
And for the proof of play publisher side of things, is the idea that you guys only plan to kind of partner with or publish, whatever the term is, on-chain games? Or is the idea that, you just want to build the best universe filled with content and entertainment, and it doesn't really matter how much you use the chain?
We're just trying to be like, can we make a game that people want to play that uses this tech? Okay. Once we cross that milestone, then we can start thinking, okay, like, what are the benefits to on-chain versus not? I personally have, I have thought about it a little bit, but like, I personally have a belief that like there's benefit to actually creating a collection of on-chain games because they all build on each other and they're all integrated by default. Like I say, like Pirate Nation is like the entry point into like our like Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Like it's like the Iron Man, of our universe. And what that means is that like every game in our universe by default is part of the same database, is part of the same block space. So anytime, if you come in through Ninja Nation instead of Pirate Nation, you're still part of the same universe, and it's easy for you to hop between them. And I don't mean like, you take a sword from here and like people are lying to themselves about how easy it is to do like interoperability between games. I think it's just like it's nonsense. Like art's different, game design is different. It's like really hard to build a game that's its own universe. But what it does mean is if I choose to, I can take actions from one game and use that to influence something in my other game. I can take your character, keep the appearance, and just like replace your entire stat system with a ninja system or whatever it may be. And so that's composability, and we are building those building blocks. But no one cares unless you have a game that people want to play. So the original idea of this company came from this realization I keep building the same things again and again in my career. I'm like tired of building leveling systems. I'm tired of building crafting systems. Like I don't want to build them ever again. I want to build it once and then forever. I want a module which I can just import into any game I ever make in the future, which is like, oh, I need the crafting system. Let me just pull the one from Pirate Nation. Now it just works. It's there, right? Now, if you take that same idea and you have a collection of developers all building modules, every next game, there's less invention you need to get that game to market, right? It's mostly just pulling the pieces together, chimeraing them together into something new and being like, here's a new thing I created. And so there's a flywheel that once it gets going, it's going to make it much more powerful and faster to build games.
Cool. Well, that just about brings us to the end of this episode. We've had a great time chatting about point systems as a UA tool. Go get yourself some booty. Building with a roadmap that's independent of crypto cycles, and building the A to Z solution for fully on-chain games on mobile, and with some interesting little tidbits on the side. Amitt, thank you very much, sir. This has been a pleasure.
Likewise, thanks for having me. And just really appreciate the thoughtful questions and like, herring out the weird sci-fi chemistry, just like weird, like mad scientist stuff that we're up to. We're really like, sometimes it really feels like we're all like on our own island with the stuff that, yes, other on-chain developers, but still pretty small community.
The content of this video is intended for informational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice. The views shared by Alex and I are our own, and we may hold investments in some of the companies or digital assets featured in the video.